Welcome to the realm of magic and mystery, classic horror and sci-fi. You are now entering the House of the Unusual podcast with your hosts, Eddie and Joe.
Today, your host, Eddie Guevara and Joe Pavlansky will be bringing you some of the best and talk show radio you can listen to. Joe, how are you?
Not too bad, Eddie. How are you?
I'm doing fantastic, Joe. I wanted Joe to ask you concerning Cryptic Classics, which has been a pretty good Facebook page that has quite a few members. Want to tell me a little bit about it, Joe?
Sure. A few years ago, I started a Facebook page. It was actually called Classic Horror and Sci-Fi Historians, and it was a page mainly about classic horror and sci-fi and digging into the history kind of, of that genre. And then about a year ago, I decided to change it up. I wanted to make it more of like a fan page, you know what I'm saying, where people could interact and they could network and really have fun, along with getting into the history of, our classic horror and sci-fi films. So I changed the name to Crypt of Classics. I thought that fit pretty well. And it's kind of just like a hangout, where people could come together and they could get to know one another, that have similar interests, kind of like, how me and you are. And, kind of like, remember when we met in Universal Monster Army.
Which is a kind of forum similar to Cryptic Classics, right?
Right, yeah. So you have the same kind of, people there that got these same interests, and, they're full of information, you're full of information, and everybody's eager to, share it with everyone and share pieces of their collection, of their books, and it's also a pretty cool page where you could, showcase your artwork. If you've written a book or any articles, you could put it on there. Usually when because I write for Scary Monsters magazine, so anytime that I have an article that comes out, I'd like to put it out there to help, promote it. And I get, some good feedback on there from fans. And
now Joe, I'm sorry, Joe, go ahead.
It's just, it's a good site for, all of us to get together and, all of us monster kids and just have a good time.
Well, Joe, let me ask you a question concerning your writing for Scary Monsters. Now, I understand that you have been writing for them for many years now.
Yeah, I'm going on about 2 years now. I think this October will be my second year anniversary, and it's been a pretty cool ride. It was something, back in the late 90s, I started collecting Scary Monsters magazine, because at the time, I think it was about 96, 97, Famous Monsters was kind of like hit and miss. It really wasn't going on too much, and there really wasn't too many other monster mags. There was cult movies, of course, Fangoria, which kind of dealt with more contemporary stuff. I wanted a magazine for the classics, so I kind of gravitated to the Scary Monsters.
Joe, I'll tell you a little story about Fangoria. Fangoria is owned by the same company that publishes Starlog magazine. Now, Starlog back in the early 70s, this is way, way back when I was pretty small. They, when they first came out, one of the incentives that they would give their people that would subscribe to them was that they got not a life size, but a blueprint of Robbie the Robot. And as a kid, I saw that, and it, I always wanted it, but actually I wound up getting it when I was an adult, because obviously my parents didn't let me to subscribe to Starlog. It was like, I think at the time was like $20 a year, which was a lot for the 70s. But, one of the things that's interesting, the story I wanted to bring up to your attention is that one time back in the early days of mail order for me, back like in 1985, I wanted to sell a hypnotic book, the 25 Lessons in Hypnotism. And the only affordable place I could go really that I could run a 1-inch ad was Fangoria and Starlog. Now, they're both, again, by the same publisher. So I actually wrote the ad, and I had an artist design the ad for me. It came out really nice, kind of like the American Circle Corp ad where you got the guy hypnotizing the girl that's very famous in
Right.
Well, the thing that was funny about that is that they rejected my ad because they said that the audience I was trying to reach was not. I guess the best way they said is that my ad was not suitable for their audience, and I'm like, are you kidding me? You have all this gore and stuff, and a book about hypnotism is not suitable for your
Yeah,
audience. They actually
yeah.
turned
It
my
seemed
ad
like
around. I mean, they turned my ad away. I couldn't run the ad, and I just couldn't believe it. See, back in the day, when you run an ad in magazines or comic books and stuff, if you really were not well known, or you're a newbie, they sometimes would reject your ads. It wasn't that easy to run an ad. And before I actually got my ad into Popular Science, I remember that one time they had me kind of change a few words on it. But anyway, since you mentioned Fangoria, I just thought that was an interesting tidbit there to bring up. And
yeah, that's pretty interesting that they would, turn away, money for for an ad. But I guess at that time, maybe pre, internet, or the infancy of the internet, they were probably getting inundated with, people wanting to put ads in their magazine for all kinds of different stuff. So I guess maybe they really had to be picky, because say if they could only put 5 or 6 ads in a magazine and they got 50 ads, they had to really kind of narrow it down to what they could, put in there to hit their, I guess, their target market.
well, here's the thing that was funny about that. The cost of the ad, this is really going to make you laugh. It was $50 for 1 inch. So it was pretty
Wow.
affordable. And then the Fangoria one was $45. Starlog was a little, obviously more expensive by about $5 because they had a bigger circulation. And if I recall the circulation at that time was like 150,000 magazines.
Oh, wow.
It wasn't like a whole big deal. Now, one thing that I can tell you about magazine circulations and when you run ads, especially in the mail order business, is that I found that sometimes when you would run an ad, like the best ad I ever ran to this day, that I got the best return for the dollar on, was an ad that said free flying saucer plans, catalog $2. And I ran that in both Popular Science and Popular Mechanics. Popular Science outdid Popular Mechanic by quite a few orders. In fact, I remember, if I'm correct, that I got over 700 orders from Popular Science. And the magazine itself, the cost of the ad was, I think, $14 a word at the time. So, you got to make it 15 words or more, or less, actually. The minimum was 15 words. And that was one of my first entrants into mail order, one of the first ads I ever ran. And it was really fascinating. But I ran another ad, which earlier, before I started selling the novelty business, I was selling how-to books. And basically, back in the day, the big thing was, just like right now it says make money on the internet, it was make money in mail order. And Mother Earth magazine, which is a very famous publication, still published today, at that time was inundated with ads that have all this famous, make money here, make money. It was all about like starting a business. So I ran in one particular magazine, which is very popular. I'm sure you heard of it. It's called Entrepreneur. And there's also another one called Inc. And I ran an ad in both magazines. The cost was like either between $10 and $15 a word. And Entrepreneur, with a 200,000 circulation, I believe, the one ad that I ran there was something like name your own income, profit daily, guarantee, no selling, work from home, grow big fast. And I worded, that's as close as I remember how I worded. I would actually have to look at one of my original ads and see how it was, but it was like that, name your own income. And I ran it at the same time, the same month, in a magazine that was a very small magazine. I thought it was called In Business, and it had a circulation of about 55,000. I doubled the amount of orders from the small magazine than from the larger circulation. So,
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that was really fascinating because I couldn't understand why some magazines would generate more than others, especially in the field of that. Now, I wanted at that time the holy grail of magazine advertising would be the Better Homes and Garden, because they had like an 8 million circulation. So at this time,
That's like unheard of nowadays.
it's They're
Not
still
even close.
they're still actually, I would say, they're still pretty large in their circulation because they're still being published. But at that time, you had a lot of mail order companies. Some were Foster Trent, others were Harriet Carter. You had Kimball's, Miles Kimball. You had quite a few of those famous mail order companies at the time. And anytime you picked up a Better Homes and Garden, if you were able or you could afford to run their ad, you would get massive amounts of order. Now, here's the funny thing: the classified section, with a minimum of 15 words, I think it was, or 12 words, the cost was $49.15 per word.
Wow.
So you had to take a big risk. Now, unlike today, for example, you go to the internet, you run an ad, and or whatever, you put a thing in eBay, and it comes out instant. But back then, when you ran an ad, you will mail the ad in, or the what you wanted to do, you had to mail it in with the, at the time that they used to be called, I forgot the camera ready artwork. You had to mail them whatever, or if it was a classified, you had to fill out the information and mail it in. And the magazine, say you wanted to run a magazine in March, you would run the ad. It would take 3 months for the ad to come out, and then the magazine will go on sale. So you really could not test the waters until like 6 months had gone by. So in order for a person to be profitable in mail order at the time, they had to run, or they had to have enough money in their pocket to be able to run 6-7 months worth of ads and experiment to see which one would draw in the most people or draw in the most crowd. And well, anyway, and that's how you came up with the results, and then you tested and tested until you made money. It was a whole different thing. Now, with the dawn of eBay and the dawn of the internet after 2000, it changed the whole frontier of mail order as a whole.
Oh,
Because,
absolutely.
I mean, now you're on eBay, you run an ad on eBay for 25 cents and reach, 40, 50 million people.
And here's the thing too, with trying to find items, back in 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and even into the 90s, basically your pre-internet days, is that you had to buy these publications in order to see what was being advertised. Whereas today, it's at your fingertips. You could go on, like you said, eBay or Amazon, or some of these other auction sites or websites, and you could find these items within a few seconds. Whereas, decades ago, it might take you months to find an item, or you might have to order it and wait that 4 to 6 weeks for it to come in. Could you imagine kids today telling them they have to wait 4 to 6 weeks for something to come in when we're so used to Amazon next day delivery? I mean, it's kind of crazy to think about it.
Some of the most, or my favorite letters that I get from my customers and people that I know, which I actually came across one a few days ago. It basically told me that one of the things that they miss in growing up is the imaginative, or the best way to put it is, when we were kids and we would look at an ad, say in a comic book, and now I say comic books because that's what I used to look at all the time, or Famous Monsters of Filmland, the Captain Company. You would look at those ads, and of course, at that time, being more lenient, a different time where laws were not as strict as today, and people were able to basically run fraudulent ads and get away with it. They would always picture things such as, bigger than life. Like you got the famous Polaris nuclear submarine. Here they would tell people that it was made of 200-pound test fiberboard, which in reality is 200-pound test cardboard. But when you looked at the fiberboard and you say 7 feet, big enough for 2 kids to walk in, it's fascinating because it gives a small juvenile, a small person with a feeble mind of an 8-year-old or 7-year-old to imagine things with whatever they're reading. And the pictures are usually the ones that sold the product more than the actual writing. And give you, for example, when I was young, back in Cuba, when I was about 4 years old, right before I came into the country, I was passing through the street one day with my mom, and she's holding me by the hand, and she shows me a Tonka truck that was some kid was playing with a Tonka truck, and she says to me, "That's a pedal car. You can drive it." Now, it's ironic. It's kind of funny the way I'm going to say this because the Tonka truck was the size of a Tonka truck. How can you get into a Tonka truck? But
Right.
I saw that it had a little steering wheel in the back of it with the where the dumpster thing is, and it had a steering wheel inside there. Don't know why, but when I looked at it, in my mind, I thought that I could literally get into this truck. I mean, I didn't imagine how am I going to do shrink myself to get? I mean, I wasn't sure, but anyway. Fast forward to the United States. Now I came here in October 30th of 1968, and while I was here, and I started reading the comic books and stuff. When I read the Polaris nuclear submarine, and this is the funny thing, I'm thinking, first of all, I didn't know how to swim. I was afraid of drowning. So I was kind of a little scared about ordering the submarine. But when I finally got around to, to say to myself, you know what? I'm going to put it inside my bathtub. But here's the funny thing about the submarine, though. In my mind, I thought I could walk inside the submarine. So I'm thinking, I'm going to put this thing in the bathtub, and it's going to be big enough for me to walk inside. And
like you're an actual submarine.
Yeah, but the funny thing about it, though, is the imagination of like, how in the world would you even think that you can put a submarine in a 6-foot in a 6-foot bathtub and walk inside the thing? So that's how wild our imagination was at the time.
We talked about this the other day about imagination, how when we were kids, that's what we used most of all was our imagination. Whereas today, these kids, they have so much technology that kind of does the work for them, where they're losing, it almost seems like they're losing their imagination. I remember, back in the 80s when I was a young kid, and even into the early 90s, my PlayStation at that time was the Sandbox. I'm sure a lot of people out there remember, having a Sandbox, and that was my G.I. Joe battleground. That was my He-Man, Eternia land where battles were going on. That's where my monsters lived, and it was a sandbox. And if I wasn't in the sandbox, I was out playing, army or cops and robbers or cowboys and Indians, and or I was doing something that involved my imagination, because we didn't have all this stuff, or we had limited stuff. I mean, I'm sure you remember tying, a bed sheet around your neck and pretending you were a superhero.
Well, I think prior to your time, actually, when I was really young, the funny thing about that is that George Reeves, which, you are aware that all the Reeves are from Steve Reeves, that was Hercules, and then George Reeves, the original Superman, to the other Reeves, that Christopher Reeves, that was in the wheelchair, that did the modern day Superman. George Reeves, in my opinion, was always my favorite Superman. And at that time, a lot of kids, especially in South American stuff, would put on capes and jump out of windows. In fact, that was something that my mom was always afraid of. And I got to be honest with you, it did enter my mind that I was able to do that, because in the superhero part, like when you see the original Superman, he always jumps out of a window and starts flying. So I lived in the 3rd floor in New York City, in the Washington Heights area, which is northern New York City, Manhattan, 173rd Street. And I was in the 3rd floor, and I got to tell you the truth, it kind of entered my mind once or twice that I would be able to leap out the window and fly.
Yeah, I've been there too. I remember being a kid, and we lived in a Cape Cod, and I had my bedroom in the attic, and I always thought, man, if I put on a cape, I could jump out the window and fly like Superman. And thank God my parents were there to tell me, no, it's not going to work. It's make believe. But I watched Superman on TV. I watched the George Reeves reruns. I watched Christopher Reeve play Superman. I said, man, if I put on a cape, I could do this,
Well,
the same thing.
that's what I'm saying. And just recently, I found in my collection, I found my original cape that my mom had done for me. I drew her the X, the S, and then she actually embroidered it onto the cape, and I still have it today, which is so funny. But
Oh
to be
wow,
honest with you,
that's priceless.
I didn't have anybody to really tell me don't jump. Like my mom was working, I was there with my grandma and grandfather, because my father had stayed in Cuba. I didn't get to see him until I was 38, but it was kind of funny though. Thank God I never got the actual idea of doing it. But I got to tell you something though. That is one of the reasons. Like a lot of people tell me, why do you sell mail order? Why do you do what you do? And I love to hear people tell me that they want to relive the original time when, as a kid, you would see an item, place an order for the item, and then you just waited desperately in anticipation, waiting for this product to come that in your mind was bigger than life. And sometimes, like, a lot of people say they got disappointed when they received it. I didn't really know what disappointment meant. When I got the stuff, even though I knew they had ripped me off, or I know today, I still treasured it. And that feeling of wonder, that feeling of anticipation, the feeling of just waiting for something brings a lot of our people, people's collectors out there, people my age, your age, brings us back to a childhood time which was much more different. And that is what makes me that is why I do what I do.
Well, check this out, because this involves about the time when me and you met. So today I was talking with Craig Tarbeck from Johnson Smith Company, and we were having a nice little chat, and I was telling him some of kind of like my memories of mail order stuff. So I told him, I said, I remember the X-ray glasses. Everybody knows the X-ray glasses. Now, I remember seeing them, I don't know if it was comic books from the 80s or if I had some of my dad's old ones that I seen the X-ray glass, advertisements in, but it had to be around mid to late 80s. So I always wanted the X-ray glasses. I said, this is, how cool would that be? I could see the bones in my hands, and I could see, what I'm made of and this and that. And, for some reason or another, when I was a kid, I never got the X-ray glasses. So fast forward a few decades when, me and you started talking from the Universal Monster Army website, and I placed an order from your website, House of the Unusual. I got the X-ray glasses. I said, man, these are going to be cool. I said, I know, it's probably overblown hype, from the advertisements, but I've always wanted a pair. So I remember being in, because I had all my collectibles, and we live in a Cape Cod, my wife and I have a lot of my collectibles in the attic. So I remember standing in my attic and putting on the glasses and looking at my hand and just being so disappointed that I could not see my bones. But I was so happy. I had the glasses on, and I must have been grinning ear to ear, because I'm just staring at my hand and moving it, front and back against the light of the window. And I'm like, man, I don't see it, but this is really cool. It was just cool to finally get the glasses that I had wanted for decades. And for some reason, while I was an adult years before that, never, bought them or for whatever reason, but I finally had them. And although I was disappointed, I couldn't see my bones, but it was just so cool. And it brought me back to, when I was like 5, 6 years old, and what would the 5 or 6 year old me think, when he had these X-ray glasses on? How cool would it be, and how far would my imagination run just having those glasses on? Because it was running as an adult. I was probably in my early 30s then when I grabbed the glasses, and I said, man, if I was 5 or 6 years old and had these glasses, I would have thought I was, some kind of superhero or something, Superman. I could see through walls and I could see through my skin. So it was something really special. And I have to, I never told you that story, but I have to, thank you for having those glasses available because it brought me back to a simpler time, and that nostalgia effect just was really cool and really hit me pretty hard. So
You see, you just reminded me when I was little, I had a next door neighbor that became my best friend. And for some reason, this kid had a wild imagination, but I was a sucker that believed everything he told me. Now, his name was Albert. And the funny thing about it is that I remember him telling me that the x-ray glasses really worked. And I waited for the x-ray glasses in anticipation. I ordered those from Johnson Smith. I didn't order those from Honor House. I ordered them from Johnson Smith. And when I got them, okay, the thing that drew me the most is because you see kind of the girl and you're like, I wonder if I could see more than I want to see, because
as every little kid is like,
they purposely did that. They purposely drew the girl with the dress, see-through dress, so that it gave a lot of young kids my age at the time, imaginative things, things happen in the brains of little kids,
Oh,
so
yeah.
I got them and I looked through them and I'm like, wait a minute, something here is not working right. So I remember putting the sheet in front of the light, like it said, a white sheet, because in back of the original glasses there were instructions on how to use them, and it will tell you to drape a sheet. Like back then, it was very popular to have a clothesline dryer. All the buildings had one in the back, And I got a rope and I tied it from one corner of the room to the other. I put the sheet, and then it was really funny because my cousin, my grandmother used to babysit my cousin, and she was about my age, And we were both. I mean, I was like 8, she was like 7, whatever. And I said to her, pass in front of the sheet there. I want to see if this thing. And she's like, no, I'm not, And she did it. But the whole thing is that it didn't work. And it was so funny, though, because I forgot what I did one time that I think the lens came out of one of my original because it was a plastic frame. I still have my original, by the way. The only thing, one of the legs broke off, and it's still missing that leg because I was never able to fix it. So I do still have the original, and the lens came out, and then I open it up and I see a feather, and I go, "What the heck? A feather?" And it's like I just didn't question it or anything. I mean, I still loved them. I loved the way they look, what they were, and again, I don't know if you could say I was naive or something, but I never realized that they had ripped me off. Like I always wanted to order something else, even though over and over again I was ripped off.
I think that was kind of the appeal of it. You purchased one item and you kind of like, man, this thing kind of sucks, and you got ripped off, and you're like, okay, let me buy this item. Maybe this one's better. And then that one came and, that one sucked too. And you're like, man, let me order this item. And it just kept going on. And so you had all these, items, and you're like, well, okay, now I have all this stuff. What am I going to do with it?
Well, you know something, Joe, back in the day, okay, let's say television, well, in my time, for you to have a color television in New York City in 1970, you were kind of a little wealthier than the rest. You know what I'm saying? And everybody had a big black and white TV. And one of the televisions I had this huge knob, and it had 4 legs, and I think that it was 25 inch, and that was considered the big screen, And it had a glass in front of the inside of the TV there. So it was kind of interesting because when you, in that time, you would want something or you bought something or you saw it in television, the whole generation of people at that time were where you really had, you had basically nothing else. If you wanted to watch Abbott and Costello, if it didn't come out, you didn't watch it. There's no VHS. There's only Super 8 film that, you recorded for like 3 minutes, and it was silent. It lacked, it was a totally different thing than what we have today. It was.
It's almost hard to imagine a time where everything wasn't at our fingertips. I mean, it's so ingrained in us now. You know what I mean?
Well, yeah, because today we have it's kind of crazy. Like, the very first game that I got, the very first, it wasn't called ColecoVision. It was called, like, before, I remember seeing Atari the first Atari 2600 system.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I was about, gosh, I don't know, 7, 8 years old, and I saw it, and it was selling for $199. That was a lot, man, for that system. Of course,
Oh, back in what would that have been, the 70s?
yeah, in the early 70s, and they gave me for Christmas one of those ping pong things that it would go deep, deep, in black and
Oh,
white.
Pong, yeah.
Yeah, and then one day in Christmas, my mom bought me one that looked like a triangle. And one side it had a steering wheel, the other side had a gun, where you got to shoot this little white and black and white guy that would go around the screen. And then the other one was the ping pong thing. I still have that original game, which is so funny. And you would buy cartridges that would go in the center of it. I don't know who made it. It wasn't Atari. I know there was one, ColecoVision. ColecoVision was also, during the Atari time, it was like the competitor to Atari, I guess. But I forgot right now. I mean, I don't remember exactly. I still have all that stuff, which is so funny that I actually kept that.
Well, I remember when Nintendo first came out, the original NES system.
I have them.
Oh yeah, I do too. That's still one of my favorite systems and a lot of my favorite games.
Do you remember
what's that?
I'm sorry. Do you remember the Nintendo with the little robot that it would move, and like you know how like the hand would grab like a spinning top and would put it in another thing, and it was a Nintendo for the television. Do you remember that one?
No, was that a game?
The Nintendo for TV. I forgot what it was, Nintendo, but it had a robot on the console itself, and the robot went from like the right to the left, and when you were going to play a game, the robot picked up a spinning disc. You don't remember what I'm talking about? Gosh,
no,
we're gonna have to talk about that in another show. I do have that game, and it belonged to my son-in-law when he was little, and I have it with the robot, but I forgot what Nintendo it was. Probably if you Google, you can find out a little bit about it. But yeah, that was a very, very famous game when it came out. Disappeared from the scene quick because obviously new things came out and it got more advanced. But video games were big in my time, and not in my time as a kid. As a kid, the only video games that I would find would be at the local Two Guys. Now, Two Guys is a store that was located in New Jersey, and the original owners of Two Guys are the people that own today. What's the name of this? The biggest land holdings in the country, Vornado Industries. Vornado.
Okay.
Vornado started the Two Guys. There were two Jewish fellows, I believe, and they were the owners of Two Guys in New York and New Jersey. And there was a couple of them. Now, Two Guys would be an equivalent to an early day five and dime store. Okay, so kind of like Woolworth and Woolco. Well, Two Guys was a store in New Jersey that when my aunt would pick me up on the weekends, me and my mom and my grandmother and grandfather, to go over to the Paramus area where I spent most of my time as a kid, they would take us to the Two Guys store. Now, the Two Guys store had a little section of video games. Now, ready for this? This is going to make you laugh. The first thing it had were the bowling alleys that you put like a dime in, and the bowling pins were attached to this little, the bowling alley I'm talking about, they were like 10 feet long. They're like the ones you put a coin in that you see in Chuck E. Cheese.
Oh, yeah.
But they were, instead of the ball, you throw the ball into the holes. No, it was actual pins, and you threw this wooden ball, and you supposedly, you knock the pins down, whatever. In reality, the pins would race up because they were attached to the top. Now, the video games that you would put a quarter in were usually shooting games that had a big rifle on the console, and then the tip of the rifle had like a chain, so you could only move it so much. So the rifle would be on a ball bearing, and the front of the rifle would be on a tip there, and then you would see way inside the video console. Like when I'm talking about the console, like Space Invaders, the video game consoles, the ones that are in the stores, and you would shoot either metal ducks, and when you shot, you heard like in the bottom part of it, you heard a shot. Like it's kind of like when you go to the arcade games over in Coney Island or any amusement park, and you have this one guy in the big arcade game where you get the gun and you shoot this guy playing a piano, and you shoot the little red metal disc, the little red disc or whatever. It was kind of like that. And the other game that was funny, the driving game, you would sit down and the steering wheel will be attached to a bar. On the front of the bar would be a plastic car, okay, red or blue, whatever color it was. And then the background inside the screen would move. And when you crash, a light underneath the car will go.
Oh, wow.
And and you can drive at different speeds. Well, those were the video games of my time. As I grew up into the age of 15, 16, 17, then the first one came out with Space Invaders and Asteroids. And I started going to a lot of those video arcades, which they sprung all over the place, right? And then the difference, well, the reason actually I didn't stick to the video games were because as they got more complex and they got more advanced, it was, see, you play Nintendo, I mean not Nintendo, you play Atari Space Invaders, for example, you have 3 characters, and if you get killed, you're gone. The game's over. Well, in the new games, you kind of got killed, but you always have like this eternal life that you will keep coming out and so I did not see an end to it. So you would play just like all this new ones they have now. The different video games they have now, you always play them, and it's like you keep playing until you get to the end of the game. You get killed a million times, but you keep coming back to life. Well, I kind of did not like that. I wanted to see where you start the game, you got 3 or 4 lives, like in Asteroids, you got 3 ships. If the ships got destroyed, bam, it was over. Well, no.
Yeah, back to the beginning.
Yeah, back to the beginning. Well, now it kind of disillusioned me a little. I kind of did not stay with the game industry, which is a shame because some people today are making millions just playing games, which is bizarre that that's even possible today. But hey, we're in a totally different society. We came from a place when we had to imagine things, play with cardboard boxes, play with anything we could imagine, and we've come to a decade where the technology is there and it's so advanced that sometimes the shame of it is that a lot of the young kids today, when they do play, they kind of don't really know much more than the play. Like if you would ask them, who's the president of the United States or something, they'll go like, what? I don't know how best to describe it. I guess with technology also makes people not have a much of an imagination as they did way back, and there's less. So I think that's why we still have this genre out there, and that's why I still sell my stuff so well, because that older genre, those older folks out there from the genre, not older genre, but from the genre that I'm in, still want to remember those days because they feel that those were the better days. They feel that that was a time growing up that they want to rekindle. And that is why I always, for some unknown reason, at certain times of the year, start getting massive letters from people, and I start getting orders for things like, who would have known that the best-selling item in the last 3 months during this quarantine we're in was a 7-foot ghost? I sold almost 60 of them, which is bizarre because you would think if it was Halloween, I'd say okay, but no, I am selling this like wildfire right now.
And speaking of your 7-foot ghost and selling these items, tell us a little bit about your website and the products you're on there, because there's so much cool items on there that kind of really bring you back to those simpler times and better times.
This is what I've done. I had a website that was built in 1998, and it stayed with the same products since 1998. It just gave me a web presence because 90% of my business that I did was done through eBay, and some of it was done through Etsy. What happened is that there was a problem with the hosting company that I had a few months ago, and they got sued supposedly by the people that worked with them. I don't exactly know what happened or the reason, but they were taken out of business. So one day I go to look at my website to pay the yearly fee, and my website was nowhere to be found. And I said, what the heck? So anyway, fast forwarding, I was able to get the name, of course, because it is a trademark. House of the Unusual is a trademark, so I'm protected worldwide because I do have a global trademark on it. But the thing that was interesting, though, is I had to open a whole new website. Now, what I did is, and this is something that's very important, is I still have 80% of my sales through my eBay page. But my website, I've only put on there 15 products. And the reason I put 15 products is because I was trying to figure out what would be the best way to make a more intuitive, a more fun website to come to. So what I did on the site, Joe, is that I added a forum and I also added a blog. And I started asking people that come to the site to join both the forum and the blog so that they can react with other people of similar likes. Kind of like Cryptic Classics. You want people to come there. Universal Monster Army. They deal with the different different likes. And most of our likes are like the same thing. It'll be Aurora Monsters, Universal Monsters, whatever. Aurora is obviously the Universal Monsters, but I'm saying people can post and talk about different things. Now, the reason I done that is because I just don't like to sell items. I like to engage with people and talk about this stuff. This is what drives me. So when I'm doing something, I want to do something that I enjoy and I take pleasure in. And there's nothing more than the mail order business that I enjoy. I mean,
and that was and that was one of the things that, kind of, I guess, pulled me into the House of the Unusual, way back in like 2012 or 13, when we started talking over at the Universal Monster site, is that, and I found your items, and it wasn't just like okay, here's my items, go ahead and buy them, pay for them, I'll ship them, thanks, have a nice day. There was a personal connection there. We talked, and you were enthusiastic about talking about the items, and it was almost like, rekindling an old friendship, when we got to talking about these items on that and about the monsters, because we had the same interest. So I didn't really see you as a businessman. I started to see you as this, friend over the internet that I know, and over the years that's how it was, and I've never seen it other than anything else. You could go to all these other sites, and it's just kind of like, it's just a simple business. You buy the stuff, they ship it to you, and then that's it. They don't care, anything else about you.
That's why, Joe, when I saw how you were, and when I saw how you throughout the years you stayed in contact, I'm like, this guy's really like me, and he's a really nice guy. So I started talking to you, and you were one of my favorite customers, basically. And that's when I asked you, let's start this podcast together, because there is so much we can put on the table here for people out there. I mean, I know you haven't mentioned it yet. I'll mention it. Me and you have been, have a lot of plans in work here. One is we're going to have, now Craig Tarbeck was the original guy in Johnson Smith for 40 years that basically created all the Johnson Smith catalogs. He's also known to have started a division of Johnson Smith called the Lighter Side, which turned into a $300 million a year business. And he also coined the phrase, things you never knew existed, back in the early 80s. He was an asset to Johnson Smith until 2010, when he finally parted his way because he retired. He was with the company 40 years. At the same time, when I started in 1985, I got together with the original owner of Fun Factory, and we started the Fun Factory. And here's kind of like something that I could say. It's kind of like a little thing out there. I'm going to throw a little thing out there that very few people know. The first mail order company that ever ran in comic books was in Action Comics, was Johnson Smith in Superman #1. And the last mail order company to run an ad in comic books in 1993 was Fun Factory under me. So basically, me and Lou Weiss, the original owner, in a partnership we ran the last comic book novelty company that run, I'm saying the last ad in comic books. And they appeared in DC Comics in the December/January issues of DC Comics in 1993. Now, having said that, we're going to have in a future show, we're going to have Lou Wise and Craig Tarbeck as our guest. And we will ask them questions that I'm sure a lot of our listeners would love to hear concerning how they came about, how they developed, and how they targeted kids at the time to sell them things.
And you know, when I was talking with Craig today, and he had mentioned that they had placed their first comic book ad in Action Comics #1, 1938, the first appearance of Superman. It took me a minute, but I was thinking, you know, Alfred Johnson Smith, he was very intuitive to put a mail order mystery ad into comic books. I mean, there had been Platinum Comics, you know, Platinum Age as we look at them now, comics at the time, Yellow Kid and so on. But for him to have the, you know, the foresight to put it in this comic and knowing how popular this comic has gotten, you know, over the years, especially, you know, coming out of the Great Depression and going into World War II, you know, the comic industry started to blow up after that Action Comics #1. And, you know, Alfred Johnson Smith was right there, you know, ahead of the mail order game with his advertising in those comic books hitting at that time, because at the time those comic books were geared for younger readers, and, you know, there wasn't too many adults that read those. So he was hitting that direct market of those kids, and those kids were turning around, running to their parents saying, "Hey, I need, you know, a dime or so to get this item or that item." And, you know, they started making a killing. You know, I know, I believe it was 1941 to 1946 that they didn't have a catalog out, and the company was kind of on hiatus due to the war. But after the war, they were making millions a year, and all this advertising from the comic books was part of the big reason for that. Another big reason was they were advertising in the pulp comics, which at the time the pulp comics were geared towards the older readers. So not only was he hitting the younger readers with the comics, but he was hitting the older readers with, you know, with the pulp books. So he was really a kind of like ahead of his time.
He was a genius. Now, originally, the original Johnson Smith Company was started in Racine, Wisconsin, I think it was. And then they moved on to Detroit, Michigan and stuff. But
he actually started in Australia.
Yeah, yes, in Australia, and then came over.
He started in Australia in 1904, and he came over to Chicago in 1914. And I believe it was 1926. Yeah, 1926. He moved to Racine, Wisconsin, and then his sons, Arthur and Paul, got involved. And Paul had the idea of moving the company to Detroit in 1935 in hopes of gaining a subsidiary company in Canada. Well, come December, December 1941, the United States entered the war. Well, the war, of course, started in 1939, but the United States entered in 1941. But because of the advent of World War II, he wasn't able to get that company into Canada, and that kind of folded from there. So,
and then he went over to, when you say Paul is one of the sons that actually, he's the one that ran the Johnson Smith Company, and he's the one that also, created my legendary 7-foot ghost, and he together with Craig did the ad. There was a guy there. They had two artists that right now they both passed away, and And that's how, the 7 foot ghost came into being, which in my opinion was the most popular ad they ever had. To me, the ghost will always live on as the best item I ever had or owned. And I'm proud to say I still got the original, both the Johnson Smith and the Melton Company Ghost. I also do have the original Honor House, which is the first one I ever ordered, but unfortunately the head is missing. We can call the head ghost.
I'm waiting for the day that you invite me over there from Ohio to New Jersey, and we put that submarine together and have our own adventure.
Yeah, that would...
I doubt two of us could fit in, or even one of us probably.
You know what's so funny about when you say the submarine? I decided to unbox the thing. Now, this is probably the only one that's left in the planet, right? And I unboxed it, and I'm showing it, and people got angry that I didn't put it together. And I go, why in the world will I build the only one left? Now, here's the thing that's funny on this. When you build the submarine, and, Honor House had a couple. They first issued the rocket, later the tank, then the submarine. And very few people know this, but they also, in close to 1995 or 96, they issued, 1989, 86 to 89. I forgot the exact time. They also issued the space shuttle. It was a 7-foot space shuttle. I had two of those. And, sad to say, back in 1995, I had a storage facility fire where I lost 4 of my original 4 bins filled with collectibles that took me quite some time to recuperate. I praise God and I go, Jesus, thank you for protecting me, protecting the stuff that meant to me, because the ghost survived the fire, and so did my 7-foot Frankenstein, Boney the skeleton, and all that. But I got to tell you something that was really, really, an interesting part about all this. All that stuff that I still have, and the time, and when it was created, and all that stuff during the 70s, that stuff means a lot to a lot of people today. And I have agreed, and I'm saying this because we have like 5 minutes left. I have agreed to always keep that alive as long as I'm alive. I like to keep the tradition alive, to let people go back in their childhood, to go back in time, to create that. And when Kirk Damaris asked me one time that he wanted to write a book and he wanted to photograph my collection, I opened up my doors to him, and he came up here and spent 3 days from Arkansas photographing my collection. That's why everything inside the book, Mail Order Mysteries, which I believe has sold close to 2 million copies, that book, everything in there is mine. There was there's no picture of the submarine because I didn't have time to find it when Kirk was here. I had to search the things, and after you spend 3 days taking things out of 2 storage units, one was 15 foot by 30, and the other one was at the time 10 by 10.
Yeah, that could be a little time consuming.
Yeah, it was crazy. We were there from like 7:30 in the morning, or 8 o'clock to like 1 o'clock in the morning one day. So I was tired. I couldn't do it anymore.
That's kind of like the same reason why I do a lot of the writing for classic horror and sci-fi. When I started off with Scary Monsters, my first article was on the Ben Cooper masks, and then I went on, well, not only the masks but the costumes, but then I went on to the old time radio shows, Lights Out and Dimension X, and then I got into more of the classic movies and all that, and it was I wanted to take people back to this maybe forgotten time, or this time that they that they like thinking about, just to even if it's for the 10 minutes or 15 minutes that it takes them to read that article, that they could go back to that time and relive those memories. That's something that keeps driving me to want to do that. And I think that's the same thing for you, is that these items that you sell on House of the Unusual, it brings these people back to a time that they wish that they could relive, but now they get to relive it in the present day. And it's kind of a form of escapism, and it's
from
it's
reality.
something that just makes them happy. Yeah.
Joe,
And that's what it's all about. It's about the people.
We have 2 minutes left, and I'm going to ask you in closing this. I'm going to say one of the other things really quick is I'm also going to ask Ray Castillas. Now, Ray Castillas is one of the friends I met in Universal Monster Army, and he's also the leading collector of Topstone and Ben Cooper Mask, and he was going to be writing a book about the whole history of Mask. And I probably would like to have him on in our show. He would be a great asset to talk with. Is there anything you'd like to say in the last 2 minutes we have? Well, closing comments?
Sure. I urge people to, I know social media, Facebook and Instagram and all these have taken over, but I urge people to go to sites like houseoftheunusual.com and universalmonsterarmy.com and join these forums and interact with people, because on these forums there's no politics, there's no religion, there's no bickering back and forth. It's all friends. It's really family oriented, talking about the stuff that we love. So you get all the good stuff on these forums. So I urge everyone to go there, support House of the Unusual, support Universal Monster Army. If you get a chance and you're on Facebook, come over to Crypt of Classics. Come over there and interact, because we have a small group of about 550 people or so, but it's a good core group of people that love the genre, love what they're doing. We have horror hosts, we have writers, artists, everybody, and everybody's so passionate about the classic horror and the classic sci-fi, and it's a fun place to be. So I urge everyone to check those sites out and to keep the classics and the mail order mysteries alive, as long as they can,
and we will,
and to pass on to their friends too, get their friends involved.
And also we will be having in our show, I'm trying to hear back from, but the Mr. Larry Wilcox from Chips, from the original TV show Chips, and I'm also going to have in the show Corporal Agarn, the original Corporal Agarn from F Troop. And, hopefully if everything's willing, I'm also going to have Sarah Karloff and possibly Victoria Price in future shows. So it's going to be fun. We need people to tune in. We need people to come to the houseoftheunusual.com, become members of the forum, become members of the blog, put in your information. Let's get to know each other better. And having said that, Joe, it's been a pleasure talking with you again, as always.
You too, Eddie.
We are now co-hosting this beautiful show that hopefully will take off. And until next time, Joe,